we observe that the blue edges only exist for the patients, but does not exist in the health people. And the blue edges is connections in the motor cortex. Hello everyone, I'm Shujian. I'm currently associate professor at the UIT Machine Learning Group. And this talk will briefly summarize my work in the last 3 months, and in which we want to actually open up a new direction to bridge the gap between information theory and graphs and the graph neural networks. And we try to improve the existing explainability of graph and graph neural network with information theoretic methods. And from the application perspective, we focus on the brain network-based psychiatric diagnosis. So the thing that we know that the brain is actually the most complex component in our body because it only represents maybe about only 2% of our overall body weight, but it consumes approximately 20% of the total amount of energy produced by our body. And we also know that our brain is much very, very complex than we can imagine because it actually contains 100 billion neurons, and most of the neurons are connected to each other. So it together with 100 trillion synapses. As a background knowledge, we also know that many humans currently suffer from different kinds of mental health problems. For example, for old people, the Alzheimer disease, and also for the depression, and for the autism, and also there are also the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what we want to do actually is to have an imaging technology to visualize the brain connectivities. And based on the images, we want to do some diagnosis, for example, to detect if people suffer from the Alzheimer or suffer from the autism, and also to identify the severity of the different diseases. And the imaging technology we used in our recent work is also about the brain, how to build the brain network. The brain network construction is we actually use a very traditional fMRI imaging techniques, and the details. Let me very briefly introduce the details. And the thing that the A is a template. The template is actually divide our brain region, the whole brain into different region of interest. You can actually understand that it has a super pixel in the images, or super pixel in other kinds of the medical images. So actually, but in the brain network analysis, we have the fixed template to divide our whole brain into different regions of interest. And there are also many medical papers from the biology perspective to analyze the function of different region of interest. For example, here, different color actually can be grouped into different sub-network of the brain, and the different color actually controls different motion or different activity of our human body. So which means that for the brain, the segmentation template is fixed. And then based on the fMRI imaging technology, we can have a series of images because this is a time, there is a time series T. And in each time instant, we can have MRI images. So as the time moves on, so actually we have a fMRI image series. And we also know that then what people did is to extract the bold signal, the blood oxygen level dependent signal associated with each of the region of interest. Because the signal is actually measures the some activity strength for this single region of interest, which means that for each region of interest, there is because it's a time series, so which also means that for each region of the region of interest in these brain images, there is a time series associated with this region of interest. So because in the traditional template there are 116 region of interest in the brain, so which means that after we extracted the board signals, there will be it's a multivariate time series, and there will be 116 time series, and each time series is associated with one of the region of interest in the brain. So what then people did is that they want to quantify the interactions, the strength of interactions between each two of the region of the interest. So the most widely used methodology in the brain network or brain machine interface is to directly quantify, for example, the linear correlation coefficients or other kinds of dependence measure to quantify the strength of dependence between adding the signals associated with adding two of the region of interest. So we can have the, for example, the linear correlation coefficient matrix. So this is of the size 116 by the 116. And then, because we know that for the linear correlation coefficient, if the value of the correlation coefficient is 1, it means that the two signals are closely related to each other. It has a high functional connectivity. However, if the correlation coefficient is very small, if, for example, reduced to 0, it means that those two time series are not related to each other. It also means that these two regions of interest in our brain do not have any functional connectivity. Then if we can put a threshold, for example, sigma, on this correlation coefficient matrix, then we can have a binary matrix. And then from this binary matrix, because it's also symmetric, and we can build, we can interpret this binary matrix as an adjacency matrix in the graph. And then from this binary matrix, we can build our brain network. So here, in the so this is how the fMRI images it's constructed and connected with the graph, because which means that we can use this framework for each patient or each person. We can build his own brain networks. And here in this graph, each node is actually a single region of interest. And if the two regions of interest are connected, which means that their correlation coefficients are very large, then there is edge to connect them. On the other hand, if the correlation coefficient is small, reduced to 0, then there is no edge to connect these two nodes. So this explains framework explain how to build the brain network, the brain graph from the fMRI imaging technology. So our motivation in the last few of the months is actually very easy to very simple. We want to because as I mentioned, for each of the patients, it has its own graph structure to describe its brain functional connectivity. So what we want to do is just to do the graph classification problem, or we can also call it the brain graph or network-based psychiatric diagnosis. For example, we want to use the topology of the graph because each patient have a graph topology to describe his brain. We want to use this graph topology, the shape of the graph, to do the classification or a diagnosis to identify if the person suffer from the autism or suffer from depression, or if he is a healthy person. So this is our motivation we want to do. And at the same time, because we know that if we collect the data, many existing machine learning technology can do a very, very good performance on the graph classification problem. Traditionally, we use the graph kernel. This is a methodology maybe 5 years ago people widely used. And now people use the graph neural networks. And you can use the GIN or GCN, lots of other graph encoders or different backbone architecture you can use. and then you can do the graph classification with very high accuracy. However, same to the images in the graph classification or graph analysis, the interpretability problem is also become very, very important. Similarly, for the images, as Anna just mentioned, in most of the cases, we want to put the interpretability on the input space, which means that we want to identify the most important pixels or super pixels, or Chan coded is actually to identify the most important patches that contributes to most to our decision that this is a dog or this is a cat. Here in the graph, because the graph do not have the pixels or do not have the super pixels, but in the graph, similarly, what we want to identify is that we want to identify the most informative edges or subnetwork. The subnetwork is just a small part of the original graph. So, and the edges is that you can imagine it's just a connection of two of the nodes. So, in order to, which means that in order to improve the interpretability on the graph classification and the graph neural networks, it's very, very important to understand which edges. For example, in this very illustrative figure, there are maybe 10 neurons, and some of the neurons are connected by an edge. For example, suppose I told you that this graph maybe can be classified as Austin. It's just an example. So it's very important. It's not sufficient. I just tell you that this graph describes. It's very important for you and for the doctors to identify which edges. For example, if the P3 or P8 contribute most to us that this is autism, and or similarly, if the subgraph in the middle, for example, this subgraph, the nodes concentrated on this region, brain region, contribute most to our decision that this is autism or this is not the autism. So which means that in images, we want to identify the pixels or super pixels, but here in the graph, we want to identify the most informative edges or subgraphs. And so in order to achieve this goal, in our recent 2 publications, which will be uploaded to the archive in the next week or next week before the Easter holiday, and we introduced 2 methodologies. The first is, again, the information bottleneck that Chan Ko has just mentioned on the images. The second is a totally new principle we call the principle of relevant information. So let me first briefly introduce the information bottleneck as a complement to what Chan Ko just mentioned. The thing that in the information bottleneck, we have the input variable x. If we can understand it's just a single image, and we also have this label y. For example, the image belongs to a cat or belongs to a dog. It's labels. So the information bottleneck is just want to learn a compressed representation T, such that this T is most informative to help us to make a decision that this is indeed a cat and this is indeed a dog. Well, why we want to learn the compressed representation T to describe our target is just because we know that in the original input space, there are lots of redundant information or lots of useless information that does not contribute most to our decision. So this explains why we want to compress or remove or drop out all the redundant information in the input space, and also guarantee that the preserved information, the T, is the most informative to our decision Y. So mathematically, one can easily formulate this learning problem as the objective shown in the middle. We want to maximize the mutual information between Y and T. Y is a label, T is a compressed representation, because we want to make T to tell us this is indeed a cat rather than a dog. So definitely, we need to maximize the mutual information term between Y and T, because it controls the sufficiency, the predicted power of T on task Y. However, as I mentioned, we also want to have a compressed representation to remove all the redundant or irrelevant information in the input space X. So which means that we want to do some kinds of compression. So mathematically we can formulate as a minimize of the mutual information between X and T. The minimization of their mutual information can be understood as a way of remove the noise, remove the redundancy, or adding irrelevant information. So combined together, the learning objective is to maximize the mutual information of YT, and with the regulation to minimize the mutual information between X and T. And the beta indeed controls the trade-off. So another figure to explain what Chang Ko just did is that in this very, very illustrative figure, suppose that here the input X is a cat, and the cat is maybe lying on a chair, and we also know that the label is a cat. So definitely our human can immediately understand that this is a cat, because we can immediately focus our attention on for example, on the head of the cat. This is maybe the most informative region, or superpixels contribute most to our decision. And we also know that if we our human want to understand this image is not a cat, we do not rely on any images on the chair, and we do not rely on any information on the background. And all those regions, superpixels, pixels in the background and in the chair, that have nothing to do with our labels. So information bottleneck can just be used, formulated is to extract the most informative region of interest, or the most salient regions that explain the decision of our network. So, and by, for example, Chang Ko just put the mask on the input space, and the motivation is that after we put for well-trained neural networks, and suppose it already trained very well, then we can expect it that the mask will be directly focused on the region of the head of the cat, and this is the representation T, the compressed representation T, because it removes over all the information in the chair, all the information in the background, and this masked region is the most informative to tell this is a cat. So which means that in the information bottleneck is a natural choice, very natural choice, to formulate the interpretability and to formulate the learning process such that we can only concentrate on the real region of interest or real superpixel that contributes to our decision. And similarly, the same idea does not only applicable to the images, it actually also applicable to the text and the signals. Let me just here the example on the right is just NLP example. For example, the input sentence, the input is currently a sentence. I cough a lot at night, and we know that the sentence is actually can be decomposed with different words or tokens. For example, among the tokens I cough, the 6 words, we want to identify in the NLP problem for the sentence classification. We know that from the NLP, we know that from this sentence, we can immediately know that there is a flu for this person. But the question is that how neural networks make this decision. So which means that it's very important to extract the most informative tokens. So similarly, if we can learn a binary mask on the tokens, and then put the mask on the input sentence and have our compressed representation, and we can expect that the compressed representation only contains, for example, the tokens of cough and night, because these two tokens are most informative, are most important for us to make a decision that I have a flu, and because for other words, for example, a, lot, it, those words are actually less relevant to make a decision if there is a flu or not. So which means that the information bottleneck, the general idea is actually from the figure illustrative example shown here, it's actually easy to understand. We just want to extract the most informative pixels or superpixels, or the most informative tokens, or in the input space, such as the extracted regions are most informative of the decision. And here, and we can apply it on either images or apply it on NLP or text. And actually, we can also use it in a multimodality way, which means that suppose I give you multimodality input, you have the images and the text simultaneously. Based on the information bottleneck, we can extract the most informative region of interest in the images and also the most informed tokens for the tag for the sentence. And one of my PhD here is exactly kind doing the multimodality analysis. But today, as I mentioned, we want to extend the same framework. Our focus is not on the images, but we focus on the graphs. As I mentioned, in order to have the graph interpretability, the most one interpretability is to extract or understand which edges or which subgraph contribute most to our decision. So suppose here the G is original graph. We have the ground truth label Y. We want to extract a subgraph GAs. So similarly, if we formulate this problem as an information bottleneck, the objective for the GNN can be straightforwardly formulated as we want to maximize the mutual information between label and the subgraph. And at the same time, we also want to minimize the mutual information between the original graph G and our extracted subgraph GAs. The first term is easy to understand because we make a GAs to make a decision that this person indeed have the autism. So we want to maximize mutual information between Y and the GAs. The second term, minimize the mutual information between G and the GAs is to actually, again, in the similar to image, to remove all the redundant or irrelevant information that has nothing to do with our decisions. So we need kinds of compression to remove all the irrelevant informations. So this is the objective currently, I guess, is very, very easy to most of people to understand. Then the second problem is how to implement this mechanism, this objective in the deep neural networks. Because of the limited time, I will not cover the technical details. And the idea is that how we implement is that because it's in order to identify the subgraph or remove the redundant edges. So what we did is that we assign a probability or drop out a probability to each of the edge. For example, the P3 means out the drop out probability if we should remove the third edge or not. And the drop out probability is always between 0 and 1. You can also understand this drop out probability, we can imagine it follow a Bologna distribution because we either drop our edge or preserve the edge. And then we assign different drop out probability to different edges. For example, in this figure, there are 12 edges. So we will have a vector, a 12-dimensional vector, and each element is just actually a drop out probability associated with each of the edge. So which means that we use the probability, we actually transform the extraction of the subgraph or identify of the most informative for us from probability perspective, because finally, if the probability learns very well, it may finally can be understand finally close to a binary vector 0, 1 or 0, 1. 0 means that we do not drop out, we keep it with high confidence, and 1 means that there is a probability 1 to drop out this probability. So which means that we transform the problem of the extract the subgraph as a way to learn the drop out probability associated with each of the edges. And in neural networks, currently we can use a gumball software because but this is details. Maybe it's not you do not need to cover all the details. But what I want to say is that there are indeed machine learning technology to make it fully differentiable, to make it this mechanism be implemented in the deep neural networks. And another technology detail is that how to measure the mutual information between the original graph and the specified and the subgraph. And in order to do this, we transform actually each of the graph and the subgraph into a vector-based representation. We can use any kinds of current backbone GNNs, for example, the GIN, GAT, or GCM. all of the existing backbone neural graph encoders can have a vector representation for this graph. So then we actually quantify the mutual information between the vector representation of the graph and the specified graph. So based on these two strategies, we implement our own graph information bottleneck. And then in practice, we also observed very interesting results. Because of the limit, I just focus on this data set. The MDD is currently the largest, I guess it's Austin. No, it's a depressed. Yes, the MDD is currently the largest depressed data set have been published, publicly available so far, and the paper is published 2 years ago on the PNAS. We know it's a top medical journal. And we evaluated our graph information bottleneck to do the depressed compression, because half of the people may suffer from the depressed, and there are also maybe many people are health control group. So it's a binary graph classification problem. And we use the GCN, GAT, the existing graph classification methodology. Their classification accuracy is 60% or 65%. But very interesting, if we use the BRIN IB, we call the BRIN information bottleneck. Our accuracy is very significantly improved the traditional graph technology GCN, GAT, and GIN. But we also significantly improve the interpretability. This is very interesting because we know that in traditional explainable AI, in the images, people always mention that in order to achieve the good interpretability, especially for the self-interpretable models, we will sacrifice a little on the performance. But here, we observed that based on the graph of BRIN information bottleneck, we do not sacrifice any classification accuracy. Rather, we significantly improve the accuracy. But we also have another advantage on the interpretability. For example, this is also I show the visualization on the interpretability because it's a little different from the images. Here, it's a cycle graph, and in the cycle graph, the left it's a cycle graph for the depressed patients. The patient has major MDD, major depressive disorder, and the left the right is a health people. And we use the graph information bottleneck to identify the most informative edges or contribute to our decision. And we can see that with our information bottleneck, graph information bottleneck, our methodology identifies some edges that are most contributable to the MDD disease. Is the edges here are marked with the red and also marked with the yellow, and those edges does not exist in the health people, which means that the red connections and the yellow connections are only unique for the depressive patients. And this is found, these connections are identified by the machine learning, by the deep neural networks. Then we want to know, does this explanation make sense from a doctor or from the biology perspective? And very, very interesting, we also have strong clinical support to those observations. And this paper is from Nature in the Nature Molecular Psychiatry, and the Nature paper told us the patients with MDD exhibit tighter interconnections between default model network and limbic network. Default network, the default model network is actually for example, the limbic network here is exactly the edges colored with the yellow. The yellow is actually the region of the limbic network in our brain, and our algorithm identifies the strong interconnections marked with the yellow edges. And the Nature paper also says that it, based on clinical research, says that the patients with MDD will exhibit tighter interactions, especially for the limbic network. And so, which means that our results based on the machine learning perspective, based on the deep neural network and the information bottleneck, we not only identified the most informative edges or subgraph contribute to our, and most importantly that because we know people always mention that in images the interpretability is unsupervised problem, but what I want to say is that in graphs, especially for brain networks, it's not totally unsupervised because we have clinical support. There are Nature papers, there are science papers, there are many top institute in the world that from biology perspective to tell us, give us some hints whether or not our extracted subgraph or edges are faithful or not. But here in our preliminary results, we show that we indeed identify some common patterns that these our edges is indeed have clinical supports, and we match very well with the ground truth. And this is our results on the information bottleneck to extract in a graph the most informative edges or subgraph. And then from the January, we also developed another information learning principle. We call it the principle of relevant information. And the formulation is different from the information bottleneck because we know that the information bottleneck, we need the label T, or label Y, sorry. We need to, the objective to maximize the mutual information between T and Y, and also at the same time minimize the information between T and X. And here, the principle of relevant information is different. We assume that we have no knowledge on the label Y. Without any knowledge on the Y, we formulate the learning in an unsupervised way. So we only give the input X and how to define a good representation T. And then again, we formulate the learning problem as a trade-off between two terms. The first term is to minimize the entropy. It's not mutual information, the entropy of the latent representation T. The second term is the divergence. You can use K divergence or AMD or any kind of distance measures you want. This is the divergence between the input variable and the latent representation T. Let me explain. The second variable, the second term is actually very easy for you to understand because the T is extracted from the original variable X. So definitely we want it has small divergence because otherwise the T is less relevant to X. This is not what we want. So we want to minimize their distributional divergence such that the T is still a good representation to of X. So this explains why we want to minimize their divergence or distance. At the same time, we also want to minimize the entropy of the T. And in machine learning or in statistics perspective, or in physics, we know that the minimization of the entropy is actually a regularization on the shape or on the uncertainty, or the total uncertainty of the variable. So which means that the minimization of the entropy of T can guarantee that our latent or our extracted representation is in a good shape, it's in a regular shape, does not contain so many randomness or does not contain so many chaos or such like that. So in order to remove the chaos to have a regular shape, so we should by one way is to minimize the entropy of the T. So which may come together. We call this is the principle of relevant information. We minimize the entropy of T and at the same time also minimize the divergence between X and the T. And I just use a very simple illustrative example to show what will happen based on the principle of relevant information. The figure A shows the original data. The X, it's a three-dimensional Gaussian distributed data in the three-dimensional space. This is X, and we learn T by minimize the entropy of the T and plus regularization on the divergence of the X and the T. And here is not the it's the beta. Sorry, it's a typo here. And similarly, because Chan Ko and also another researcher just mentioned in information bottleneck, indeed the beta controls the size of the mask and the explanation. There is a theoretical analysis how to control the beta. This is maybe an answer maybe Chan Ko does not mention, but here. Similarly, for the principle of relevant information, the beta also controls the representation T. For example, if the beta equal to 0, what does it mean? It means that the beta equal to 0, we only want to minimize the entropy of the T. Then we know that in physics or statistics, the representation, the group of data is uncertainty can reduce it to 0 if and only if all the points converge to a single point. So which means that if the beta equal to 0, the analytical solution is that all the points converge to these single points. We have a single representation. And on the other extreme case, if the beta is very, very large, for example, if the beta is infinity or 100, which means that currently the divergence plays a very important role. We want to minimize the divergence between the X and the T. So definitely we will recover the original data. We do not have any compression. But what's interesting is that the beta equal to 2 or beta equal to 5, we can find that if, for example, if the beta equal to 2, we identified that the alpha latent representation T naturally learn a nonlinear manifold in the three-dimensional space, and it looks like a nonlinear cycle. And this cycle means that the T is very regular shaped. It has a nonlinear manifold shape, but the T is also easy for us to describe than the random Gaussian distributions. So, and similarly, if the beta equal to 5, our T is actually in a circle shape, and it's also easy for us to describe than the original X, but it also has its own regularity, but it's also much easier for us to describe what happens in the original data X. So means that the principal relevant information, the beta is also an important parameter to control, and different hyperparameters of the beta will give us different final representations. Then we apply the principle of relevant information in the graphs. And this is because we know that for the original graph G, and this is a GS, we know that suppose I told you that this G is classified as autism or classified as depressed, but we know that most of the edges are noise, or most of the edges does not contribute to our decision. So the problem is that do we have a way to remove or to drop out the less informative edges such that the specified graph is the most informative of decision? The answer is yes. Based on the principle of relevant information, the PRE, we can formulate the specification problem as to first minimize the uncertainty, the shape of the uncertainty of the subgraph GAs, and at the same time also minimize the topology divergence between the original G and the new graph GAs. This topology minimization, divergence minimization, guarantee that our specified graph, after remove the less informative edges, is in the shape still similar to the original graph. And the first regularization, the minimization of the entropy on the topology of the GAs, guarantee that the graph is in a well-shaped. For example, it may have a cycle, or it may look at a star graph, something like that. So come together, we bring the idea of the print from the traditional random variables or images into the graph. We formulate it as a graph specification, or remove the redundant edges as a way of the minimize of the entropy of the GAs plus a divergence on the original G and the traditional GAs. And but I will not cover the details. It's because mathematically it's a little complex. But what I want to say that different from information bottleneck, we theoretically prove that the beta controls the sparsity, and in order to plug in the principal relevant information, on the graph classification problems. And we have the traditional cross-sectional laws to train our GNAs, but at the same time, we add an additional regulation. The additional regulation is to learn from the original G, representative, the most informative parts of the G prime, the subgraph GAs, and we guarantee that the GAs have a regular shape topology, and at the same time, the original G and the GAs in topology have a small divergence. So this is the final overall objective. We call it the graph principle rather than information. And again, we can improve the classification accuracy, but here I focus on the expandability analysis or interpretation. For example, we evaluate our graph principle of relevant information in another widely used the benchmark Alzheimer dataset, and there is again it's a binary classification problem. Some people have the Alzheimer, and some people are health control. So we identify that for the Alzheimer patients, the edges contribute most to our decision are the blue edges, and and on the other hand, for the health control group, for the normal health people, informative edges are rather different from the Alzheimer patients. Their informative edges are marked with the yellow, our first observation is that we observe that the blue edges only exist for the patients, but does not exist in the health people, and the blue edges is connections in the motor cortex, and which means that our result identified that the motor cortex excitability is enhanced for the Alzheimer patients. And also, again, as I said, we have the ground truth, and the biology scientists also identified, but it's on the clinical or biology experiment identified that indeed the motor cortex excitability and the connectivity in the Alzheimer disease is indeed enhanced. And similarly, we also identified the yellow edges only exist for the health people, does not exist for the patients. And this is also supported by the clinical papers, which identified the interconnections within the frontal parietal network, and the yellow edges of patients are significantly less than that of the NC group. So which means that our results, it's much faithful because we have the clinical results to support our decisions. But based on either information bottleneck or principal relevant information, we can remove the less informative edges just to extract the most informative subgraph contribute to our decision. So the final conclusion and the take-home message that here at the UIT, we begin a new direction is to combine the information theory with graph and to improve the accessibility from the image space to the graph. But in this talk today, I mentioned our first work to model the fMRI images as a graph, and how to use the graph neural network to improve the interpretability of the clinical results. And another is that we present two ways from information theory perspective, the information bottleneck and the principle of relevant information. Both methods can improve significantly the interpretability, and the most important is that it does not sacrifice any classification accuracy. And the two papers will be uploaded to the archive in the next week before the Easter holidays, and we will also release the code. Thanks.